Hello and welcome to a special Gardener's World. Today, Adley and I will be spending the whole programme here at Gravetime Manor in West Sussex.
Historically, this is a really significant garden, created in the late 1800s by gardening pioneer William Robinson. He was a visionary and he was well ahead of his time.
Nearly 150 years on, and Gravetime Manor still has a beautiful garden. And over the next hour, we'll be looking at the design, the planting and the history of this incredible place. Coming up on today's programme, Sue is back in her own garden, tackling some late summer jobs.
I was given these strawberries, I don't know what variety they were, and I've looked after them beautifully for 3 years, and they've never produced, despite all my efforts, and I'm getting rid of it, and I'm going to grow parsley.
We visit an alleyway in Manchester that has been transformed into a garden for all the community.
To me personally, I've got peace out here, and when you go to work, the rush of the day and everything outside, the rush of all that, when you come round the back, it's just so nice with all the flowers in bloom.
And we meet a gardener who has turned every available inch of his outdoor space over to growing fruit and veg.
The space is not big. At first I thought this was a sort of curse, then I realised I'm actually really lucky because that gave me a different perspective on gardening.
Gravetime Manor is big and beautiful, set in a picturesque wooded valley. It's got a lake, meadows, orchards, and flanking the house are impressive flower gardens created by William Robinson. Wow.
Isn't it just?
Incredible.
Isn't it wonderful?
Yeah. When he arrived, what was here?
Absolutely nothing. He created this garden from scratch. It was the garden he made for himself, and it has his soul in it.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because straight away it feels good, but I think the house sits beautifully on the spot, and then you get this sort of rolling landscape. But then you're in this incredible flower garden that feels like classic English, but with a twist. You start looking closer and see, yeah, the shrub roses, and then there's herbaceous perennials, annuals, but then he's got cannas throwing up there as well.
He liked subtropical plants with the big leaves and the lushness. And he really, really liked this natural look.
And actually, you say the word natural, and when I'm looking around, there's lots of things that are self-seeded as well. So you've got these seed heads, but they're in random places, which gives it this slightly wild, unkept feel.
And that's exactly what he was aiming for. He was trying to get away from that whole regimented look to the garden. What he was doing when he was creating this, it caused a bit of a stir because he was a radical man.
This planting may look familiar to us now, but to appreciate why Robinson was so radical, you have to remember that he was designing this in the Victorian era, when gardens were incredibly formal, as Adley discovered on a visit to Sheffield Botanic Gardens.
William Robinson lived in a time of change, opportunity, and huge discoveries in gardening. He was born in 1838, a year after Queen Victoria came to the throne, so he grew up surrounded by new and exciting plants arriving from all over the world. Some of those plants he embraced, others he was less keen on. but he was a classic Victorian in the way he saw opportunity and ran with it. He went from garden boy to foreman, launched gardening magazines, wrote best-selling books, was lifelong friends with Gertrude Jekyll, and he inspired millions of gardeners. Robinson was raised in Ireland and started his gardening there. But in 1861, he headed to London and a job at Regent's Park Botanical Gardens. At that time, they were the height of fashion. With a huge range of plants being brought in from all corners of the world, botanical gardens were where the middle classes, occasionally the lower classes, got to see them for the first time. The wealthy had their own glass houses, but pavilions like this one at Sheffield Botanical Gardens gave everyone a look, and some of the new exotic plants even made it outdoors. Carpet bedding like this became very popular. Tender plants in strict rows, the more symmetrical and garish, the better. As today, they had to be planted out after the last frost and dug up again in the autumn. The greater the range of plants, the bigger the kudos. Different plants showed that more money had been spent, and top gardens like Sheffield would have pulled out all the stops. It was designed by Robert Marnock, Robinson's boss at Regent's Park, and he was a great supporter of his protégé. In 1863, Robinson won a grant to go and visit other botanical gardens and nurseries, learning about their plants and obviously bringing some back. It wasn't just exotics he was looking at. New herbaceous perennials were arriving too, which he loved, and he wanted to get them into gardens. So he found a workingmen's college. It provided extra education in the evening, and he went to learn English grammar and composition. As a man on a mission, he was soon writing for the Gardener's Chronicle, which provided the latest news and innovations for the gardening world. His articles were popular, and alongside, Robinson began mixing in very high circles. He even met Charles Darwin, who helped him join the Linnaean Society, which is where the botanists and horticulturalists gathered. He had arrived. Soon he headed across the Channel, writing books and lots of articles about French techniques and gardens. He discovered fabulous secateurs which delighted him, but some of the gardens definitely didn't. He wasn't always subtle with his reviews. When he visited Versailles, he said, "This being one of the most celebrated gardens in the world, it behoves us to examine it somewhat in detail. Were we, however, to treat it in proportion of its real merits as a garden, a very small amount of space would suffice." Ouch. Robinson loathed the spurting water, statues and rigid planting. It was all too regimented. He was longing for borders of perennials, natives and shrubs growing together in abundance. He wanted plants that would stay here all year, could set seed and look more natural. Robinson was not alone in wanting different planting, and by using his many magazines and books to popularise these new ideas, the tide of gardening fashion began to turn. He was a change maker, and along with others, he helped to make it happen.
William Robinson's ideas are still at the heart of all the planting at Gravetie, and there's lots of inspiration for our own gardens. The first area I've walked into is called the Little Garden, so it's a smaller space. But straight away it feels comfortable, and that's because of this paving, which sits well with the house, so sets the tone. And actually, it feels a little wild. It's quite brave planting. But when you look closer, you realise it's really clever, and it's put together on a layer system. The magnolia there could be incredibly overpowering, but the Rosa glauca has been left to get higher, which means it starts to pull the magnolia into the garden. Imagine if you're at home, you've got a bigger tree, you can offset it with something slightly smaller. And it would have been really obvious then just to lower the planting down over to this side, but they haven't, and they've put a Philadelphus over there, which counterbalances with the rose. So you've got these two high points, and it's a lovely way to start to build the border. There's a really vertical punch all the way through, so you've got Miscanthus, the stiper, and then Molinia over there. And even the diorama are giving you those really strong verticals. And then it's built with this herbaceous planting, and there's lots of different leaf shapes and forms. And colour-wise, pinks, soft pinks, and then things like the dahlia there that are slightly more in your face. And then there's some whites just to soften everything down. And then little punches of blue with the Russian sage. But I do like the way as well that the big stuff's at the front. So you have to push your way back through. You have to engage in the garden, which for me is what it's all about. This is a garden that you definitely want to engage with. And now we're off to Manchester to meet a gardener who's doing just that for his neighbours.
To me personally, it means I've got peace out here. It's nice, it's quiet, and when you go to work, the rush of the day and everything outside, the rush of all that, when you come round the back, it's just so nice with all the flowers in bloom. My name is Patrick, and I live in Levenshulme, and this is my alley garden. The space round this alleyway, when I moved in, was a mess. There was broken bottles, there was people around the back at night times, there was all the things that you really don't want. We never really came out in the alleyway. We just sort of like stayed in our own little garden until the council put the gates on. It was like my opportunity then to sort of like try and turn this into something beautiful for the neighbours. So I got stuck into it, anything that I could find. I thought I was going to stop at one point, but then there was always space to put more things in. Karen, my wife, is always saying, "You've got too many plants, you've not got any room." I said, "There's always room for one more." I like to write names of what the plants are called. And this one's a Himalayan honeysuckle. The bees love these, and I like them because of the bell shape on them. They look really nice. The pegs, I put them high up so that people can see them. They're not having to look down the bottom for them. The nice height, and it's a way of letting the neighbours or anybody that's out here know what the plants is. They want to buy those plants themselves. The things that I use with boxes, I use anything. Anything that I can find. Recycling, that's the main thing about it. It doesn't cost a lot because you can find things outside. What someone throws away, it's another man's treasure. These tyres I got from a local garage that were giving them away, painted them up, sorted out, get a nice colour with them, put the pot in the middle and put a cordyline in it to give it a nice height. I've got a bread bin that I use, a washing up bowl that I use. So anything that I can find, I just use it and then just add them to the alley garden because it makes it look different and people enjoy seeing something different in the garden. Why I do that? That's a good question. The wife always asks me that. Why are you making these things? The alley doesn't need any more. But I said, I'm just creating something, just making something different. To give somebody a laugh with seeing it, or inspire somebody that can do it, maybe do it better than me, but it's something that you can do and it's keeping me busy. My mum was good at gardening and she was good with her, getting all green fingers, and so I've just naturally got that from her. In my alley garden, I've got loads of lovely plants, but this one is my mum's plum tree. When she passed 5 years ago, I took it and brought it here, and for the last 5 years, it hasn't bared anything, and this year, the first time, it's got plums growing on it, so I'm looking forward to trying it, and it's so special, this one for me. Before my mum passed, I was lucky to get her, she was able to see the alleyway. She loved it. She used to always, every time she come for a Sunday dinner, she'd always go out and she'd have a look and see all the new things that was growing. I think it has helped the community because we've got to know the neighbours round here. You chat, and when you come out to do bins, you know them by name. I've got to the stages now where I take cuttings and then I will, grow the plants myself from off the cuttings, and then with that I can spread them around the alleyway and give them away as well. We've had other people who've seen it and they've started their own. They've gone off and they've cleaned up theirs and they've started, and it's cotton on with a lot of people now, that people now are trying to take ownership of their alleyway and to fix them up and make them look good.
I thought it was absolutely amazing what Patrick's doing in the community. He's working towards creating a space that people can enjoy. When you walk into the alleyway, it's just vibrant with colour, plants. I came away from Patrick's and felt I really wanted to do something with my alleyway, that people can see it as an extension of their garden, and the community can come out, people can get to know each other in this space.
It's amazing to see my ideas spread. It's amazing to see people that have come, had a look at it, been inspired to start their own. Sometimes when you're sitting there, you don't feel as if you're actually in living room. You feel like and when the sun's shining, you feel good. You feel that you're somewhere else, and blue skies, and you could be anywhere. My wife keeps wanting to move. Well, Karen keeps wanting to move, but I keep saying, I've got this alleyway to look after, you see, so there's no one else to do it, so I'm here for the longer haul.
That really is a cracking space and definitely put a smile on my face. And Patrick, I agree with you. There is always enough room for another plant.
When the garden at Gravetye was created back in the 1880s, William Robinson had been a full-time writer for almost 20 years. He'd also spent a lot of time overseas, learning more about new plants and gardens. As well as his many months in France, he also travelled to North Africa, the USA and Canada, as well as many gardens in Great Britain. As a result, his magazines and books were full of added expertise. The English Flower Garden was probably his most popular read. Wow, this is absolutely fabulous. First edition, William Robinson's book. It is absolutely wonderful handling things like this. It has many chapters, and an early one recommends gardens to visit around the country. He includes drawings, which would have been very unusual for readers. Books around that time just had this dense writing, whereas this one, he's included a lot of illustrations. And what he's done is that he's not only included single plants, and this would have been the first time that a lot of people would have seen them, but he's also shown how you could arrange them for yourselves. These planting schemes provided inspiration, and he gave detailed explanation of where they would thrive. He was very fond of subtropical plants with their big foliage, like this Caladium esculentum here. And he also advises on the best places to plant and how to plant them. And he says, it is only in the Midland and Southern counties of Great Britain that it can be advantageously grown, but its grand outlines and aspect, when well developed, make it worthy wherever the climate is warm enough for its growth. You can see why his books were so popular, because he'd seen a lot of these plants growing in their native habitat, and therefore he knew the right plant in the right place was important, and he could therefore give this information to everybody. Gravetye was the garden where Robinson could put his ideas and ethos into practice, creating natural-looking borders with perennials and shrubs and adding tender plants to extend the season. These days, that planting is just as stunning.
These long borders are absolutely breathtaking. The colour, the shapes, the forms, the movement. So how do you take a little piece of this to create in your own back garden? You walk in here and the planting is absolutely exquisite and a little bit mind-blowing, and you think, how can I do that? But interestingly, I think sometimes we just walk on by a bit too quick and we say, oh, that's nice, rather than slowing right down and looking at the detail. So the plant that caught my eye here was this Plectranthus. I think that plant is the starting point for the rest of the planting around it. It's got interesting foliage, not much in the way of flower, it doesn't need it. It's soft, it's furry, but look how everything works. You've got the salvia, look at the colours. Lovely dark flower against there. And then we come across Diacia. This for me is a tender plant, but that flower shape sits beautifully against that foliage. The Lychnis, again, you can see really strong against that background. And yes, I am getting a little excited. And then if I bring over the Aster, the tiny little yellow eye just works really well. They just all sing, but they wouldn't do that without that plant. And then I start to enjoy it and realise there's even more going on. The Rosa glauca, beautiful foliage, that tones in well, but the hips are stunning in here with the Aster and the Diacia. And yeah, it probably feels complex, but actually in reality, if you can work out that key plant, remember it doesn't have to be a star like all the others, but it becomes the starting point. And then you're looking all the different foliages that you can add around it. And then finally, looking at the flower shapes. And it could be a container outside the back door. It could be a small border. It's just about slowing down, paying attention to the detail. And you could do that outside your back door. This detailed planting has been created and nurtured by head gardener Tom Coward. He has taken the garden back to its William Robinson roots over 12 years with the help of his dedicated team. What was it that just you as a gardener went, yeah, I'll give that a go?
Well, look at it. You can't
Well,
turn the opportunity down.
Yeah.
I've known this garden since I was 18. Of course, you learn about it in garden history, and it's a garden that I've always visited, sort of studied over the years. So when the opportunity came, it was really exciting.
When you take on something like this, where do you start?
You've got to work out the priorities.
Yeah.
So we needed to tackle perennial weeds, because every garden's got perennial weeds. And I was just trying to pull the bindweed out here when you came along. You know, I've been fighting this my whole career.
It's quite refreshing though, mate, because that's what the rest of us have to do.
And William Robinson wrote about it's actually a beautiful plant, you know, and when it flowers with Japanese anemones, it's a lovely combination.
Yeah.
I'll give you some root cuttings to take home if you want. So, yeah, we were trying to really, in these borders, address the perennial weed problem while still having flowers, because we're doing two things. We're a heritage garden, and we've got to respect William Robinson and keep his legacy alive. But also we're a hotel and restaurant, and we're a display garden. So we've got to have a consistent display. And so we're using a lot of key Robinson plants and key Robinson principles, but we're also cheating a little bit and using annuals and tender perennials. And then the really important element in this is the self-sower, like the Persicaria orientalis or the fennel.
Yeah.
Because if you've got something that's seeding and spreading itself freely, you've got something wild.
Yeah.
And you can put that into a really formal setting or a really wild setting, but that element is what really makes it beautiful for me. The plants putting themselves where they want to be.
I'm totally not with you. I love this as a way of gardening. So in a sense, what you're doing is the borders have set up, and then these self-seeders are given that freedom, which is probably what gives this the magic, really.
And you've got to remember that gardens are never static. This is always changing in Robinson's life.
Yeah.
This is a writer's gardening. Changed with his writing, and his writing changed with the garden. It's a nice example. It's Rosa Moisei, collected from the Tibetan frontier, and he wrote about this in 1905 when it was just hot stuff, just come back in England, and he said, this is the most exciting rose that's been introduced to our shores. And he said, already people are excited about what they might hybridise with it. But then he said, why bother? It's perfect as it is, and I'll go with that. This will colour up bright red,
it will.
And it'll hold its hips way beyond Christmas.
The beautiful thing is not only you carrying this amazing sort of story on, but actually he would have walked all this.
Yeah, you can often feel him a little bit, the presence of him. I think it's important not to be held back by history. Yeah. But it's always important to have his principles and his character in your mind. Often he's portrayed as someone that was a bit cantankerous and outspoken, and he was a man trying to instigate change. I prefer to think of him like that, and just trying to tap into his love of plants, really.
Yeah, you definitely got the essence of what he was about and just run with it, and it's just stunning, mate. Really stunning.
Thank you. Yeah.
Still to come on today's programme, Adley and I will be uncovering the ingenious design of William Robinson's wall garden. And we visit an equally innovative vegetable garden on a slightly smaller scale.
What I have here is just 8 by 5 meters, so it's not a massive space. So I garden horizontally, vertically, use even my compost bin as a container for plants.
But first, we're heading to Swansea to catch up with Sue.
I've come back from creating a show garden at Hampton Court, and it was so exciting, full of hustle and bustle. And I'd hoped I would come back to a quiet haven, but although it's beautiful, the agapanthus are lovely, the bees are buzzing in the lavender, it's looking quite neglected, and a lot of things need deadheading, and a lot of things need watering. So there's a lot to do, but I can't be too harsh on myself. It's not a show garden, it's my garden. So I'm just going to concentrate on getting jobs done and working slowly through to make my garden a bit more loved. My sedums are looking really sick, and it's very sad because I've had them for about 12 years and I grew them all myself. There's about 16 of them repeated along the border, and they seem to have a fungus called powdery mildew. And it attacks the leaves, coating them in a white fungal infection, and then they gradually die and drop off. I know that fungal infection thrives in dry conditions, which is what was happening while I was at Hampton Court, and they didn't get watered. So what I think I'm going to do is come down the border every day, pick up the leaves and take them away and throw them away because they harbour disease, and give it regular watering and see if that works first. And if it doesn't, I may have to be a little bit more radical.
But there's a project elsewhere in the garden that I was really excited to check in on.
Back in April, I laid a mushroom bed with layers of cardboard, wood chip and mushroom spawn, repeated the layers and then covered it in barley straw. Then I watered it. You have to water it really regularly. When I got back from Hampton Court, there were 3 mushrooms growing, and I picked one. I'm growing King Stropharia mushrooms, and these are also known as wine cap, and they should have a red tinge. These didn't. Because I'm unsure of what sort of mushroom it is, I'm not going to eat it because it could be dangerous. If you can't identify your mushrooms, don't eat them. My mushrooms should start to develop in September. I'm going to give it a bit of TLC. It needs a bit of tidying up, and of course it needs regularly watering, and then hopefully I will have mushrooms on my dinner plate. Something really nice to look forward to. Look at my lovely tomatoes.
Not everything in the garden is always successful though, and sometimes you just have to cut your losses.
I'm using my claw to remove the strawberries from my strawberry bed. I was given these strawberries, I don't know what variety they were, and I've looked after them beautifully for 3 years, and they've never produced, despite all my efforts, more than about 6 strawberries, and most of those were tiny. So I'm fed up, and I'm getting rid of it, and I'm going to grow parsley. This tool for me is easier than digging. Twisting is easier for me than digging and lifting.
But sometimes failures make way for opportunities.
I have never succeeded at growing parsley from seed. So this is my annual cheat. I buy supermarket parsley and I divide it and plant it. And usually within 2 or 3 weeks, I've got lovely, fresh parsley plants growing. It's a very cost-effective way of growing parsley. I've soaked these in water overnight so they're easier to split, and I'm going to do less harm to the roots. And you gradually find the stem and then tease it away. You can see here, there's a lovely root system, and I'm going to put a hole in the soil with my dibber and then just pop the plants in. About a hand width apart. I'm trying my best not to get dirty for the cameras, but normally this is a filthy job. I've topped up the bed with some peat-free compost that's suitable for growing leafy greens, and I'm just firming down the soil to make sure it comes fully in contact with the roots. Then I'm going to give it a good water.
There's still a lot of colour in my borders, but I also want to bring some of that colour right up to one of my favourite seating areas.
I'm potting on some new pots for a display I'm creating. I like to use lots of small pots to create a display as if it was a big pot. I find big pots really quite difficult to manage, and I feel quite alienated. I have to wait for someone to come and move them. And also, when I mix things in pots, some things tend to die and some things tend to do well. By using lots of little pots and putting them together, each plant doesn't have to fight for its space. I'm using 3 different plants to give the display a bit of variety. I'm using Hebenstrettia dura variegata, which is only going to grow to about 30 centimetres. I've used Dianthus pink kisses, that's a lovely name, and I've used some of the Erigeron that didn't make it to Hampton Court. So this is the sort of pot that I'm able to lift really happily. They get about that much bigger and I can just about cope, but any bigger it becomes a real strain. So I found this way of using lots of little small pots really makes me feel enabled and lets me enjoy plant pot life. And I think it's useful not only for me, but lots of people find these big heavy pots difficult. You can have lots of different plants, or you can do a mono display, which can look really effective. The world's your oyster, really. I'm really pleased with this. I need a big pot to raise plants to this nice level, but instead I've used a table, and by putting all the plants together I've created that big pot feel. It's so lovely to be back in my own garden. The lavender's looking a bit leggy and will need to come out when it's finished flowering, and that's going to create space for me. I'm going to try and apply some of the lessons that I learnt at Hampton Court to perhaps give this border a facelift. But for now, I'm going to carry on with the work of deadheading and just enjoy the bees.
I know exactly how Sue feels. You get home from a busy flower show, and it's wonderful to be back in your own garden, even if that list of jobs has got just that little bit longer.
At Gravetye, one of William Robinson's major passions was creating a garden that gradually dovetailed into the landscape. So while the more formal planting stayed close to the house, he also suggested that there were loads of opportunities for the next layer, the meadows, the shrubberies and the wilder garden. As the land got wilder, he felt the planting and arrangements should too. His meadows were full of native flowers and bulbs. The shrubberies and orchard he underplanted with perennials to give form and colour. Today, the orchard still has a riot of Camasias in the spring, but his love of edible plants led to one of Robinson's biggest creations, a magnificent walled garden.
I think I am in love with the shape of this garden.
Well, of course, historically, kitchen gardens would have been either rectangular or square, but this is why this is so unusual.
Also design-wise, because we're on a steep hillside, the curve sits comfortably, but it also means we've not got any long straight paths and corners and turns and lovely sort of circular movement.
It's comfortable, isn't it? You know why he built it here, don't you?
No, go on.
There's a natural spring, so of course, never run out of water.
But also, because I like stone, this is gorgeous. The colour of that stone would suck up the heat and then just release it through the day. So you'd end up with these wonderful little microclimates.
It's beautiful, isn't it? And of course, you know, he had his own local quarry and he advocated the use of local material.
Yeah.
So he had all his men bring this here to create this beautiful, beautiful space.
Which gives it a lovely sort of sense of place and it belongs. But you think about it, how his mind works. This is south facing, so it's going to get loads out of the sun. But southwesterly is good air circulation because it's going to go round and round. The north and the east, it feels really well protected. And, you know, I know it's been a warm year, but some of this veg and fruit looks quite advanced. And I wonder whether that is because it's getting a few more degrees out of the hillside.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Anyway, I've got something else to show you. Come
Well,
with me.
lead on, mate, lead on.
These are gorgeous Robinson-inspired gates. But at the bottom of the garden is his deceptively simple-looking pool with more edibles.
Watercress. Clever. Probably making the most of the spring.
What do you think that is?
What, the hole? I think that's spring-fed, fills up, overflows out of the garden.
Close. It is an overflow, and it's an overflow for frost to escape.
You're winding me up, aren't you?
No, I'm not. I'm not winding you up.
I get it, but there's no way that I'm getting out of that hole, is there? Eh?
In a lot of kitchen gardens, you had frost gates.
Yeah.
And there would be nice, ornate little gates.
That I could get through.
That you could get through, definitely get through those ones. But because Robinson liked simplicity, he kept this simple, but it's still extremely effective.
Yeah. It's clever, isn't it? It's understanding your site. This veg garden is absolutely incredible. Also feels a little overwhelming, and it's left me feeling slightly inadequate. That's what happens, doesn't it, when you come to places like this? But we come to get ideas. How do you distill big areas down to something you can do at home? Here you've got this lovely oval shape, but big deep borders against the wall, so there's plenty of depth there. Then it's broken into quarters. And there's a lot of interplanting, so you've got your edibles in with your ornamentals. And I think for me, that's what I want to do a lot more at home. Look at those kales. Look at the textures, the finishes, the colours. Why can't you use those as annuals and put them in borders? And here, though there is loads of space, they've not wasted any. We've got courgettes growing on the ground, and you can see how much space they'll take up. But then they've done a row vertically. I think that's an absolute great idea. Here, I've just walked along the main path, and the only lawn in here is this piece here. And it really pulls your attention down that way and up here. And that's made even stronger by these step-over apples, which is a classic way of dividing space. But interestingly, back there, they've not just used them at the edges. What they've done is put them back a little bit, put more ornamental planting in front of them, but not just with step-overs, with espaliers. So if you wanted a bit more height, maybe you wanted to enclose an area so the other side of it feels a little bit more cosy, they are just the job. As sad as it seems, I think this wall's absolutely gorgeous. But interestingly, I touched the top wall and it's definitely a few degrees warmer than down here. I think that's the thing with veg gardening and fruit, really understanding the microclimates in your own garden. Even if it's small, there will be differences in temperature. Up there, you've got things like peaches and figs. And down here, it doesn't need quite so much light and heat. But look, is that not a cool way of growing blackcurrants? Normally grow them as bushes, but here it's been planted back against the wall, and you can see the stems have been chosen and then tied back in this incredible fan. And obviously currants fruit on last season's growth. So I think here what they've done is some are pruned This year's growth has been cut back to 3 or 4 buds, and that is where next year's fruit will come from. And behind me, over there, it's done exactly the same thing with gooseberries. I think with me moving into a smaller space, yeah, I'm filling up all the borders, but can I get more out of the vertical space? And this says, yes, I can. Looking out there, it's incredibly inspirational. But what's great about growing vegetables is you don't need all of that space. You can have just an area outside the back door and still grow some wonderful stuff. And now we're off to London to meet a gardener who's demonstrating just that.
I moved to UK roughly 7 years ago. I come from a really small town in North Italy, and all around where I live, it's full of fields with like loads of different varieties of vegetables, and so that's what reminds me of home. As I sort of try to feel like I was home again, I surrounded myself with like a front and backyard full of nature. I had to move 5 times because it's London, isn't it? Every time I had to move all my raised beds, the soil, and my glass greenhouse. And at some point, luckily, I found this house. The space is not big. At first, I thought this was a sort of curse. Then I realized I'm actually really lucky because that gave me a different perspective on gardening. Hi, my name is Alessandro Vitale, and also known as Spicy Moustache. And I'm based in London, and my goal is to grow vegetables sustainably and teach people how they could do that, even in the middle of the city. We used to love growing chilies. I did one season that I had something between 70 to 100 varieties. My girlfriend at first, she didn't like super hot food. Every time she was giving me a kiss, she was complaining because like spicy food was stealing my mustache. And it all began like, as a joke. What I have here is just 8 by 5 meters, so it's not a massive space. So I garden horizontally, vertically. I live in a rented flat at the first floor. What I try to do is to recycle as much as possible, using a bit of DIY and reducing my waste. What can you do with a bottle of water? You can do a hanging container, you could do a vertical garden, you could do so many things. I've got 9 raised beds, and most of them are made using recycled materials. I found materials like along the street, like from my neighbors, and I use it to build the raised beds. In this raised bed here, for example, I'm growing a lot of different things like leafy greens, celery, roots like beetroots or radish, but also flowers, and have an ecosystem for insects to come by and have more wildlife. This is my glass greenhouse. It's my favorite part of the garden. I found an ad online, and I was really, really happy because most of the times they're really expensive. I went with my friend, we dismantled the whole thing, we brought it here. What I'm growing here, it's a lot of different varieties of tomatoes, but also cucumbers, kohlrabi, flowers, and one of my favorite things that I finally managed to grow is melon, and I'm gonna harvest it at the end of the season. So I had a lot of strawberries coming out of my hanging recycled basket. The cool thing about this is that you don't have many pests that are hanging, so you make their life harder. I clone my strawberries. Basically, what I do, I use old fleece around the base of one of the runners, and I just add a bit of soil. And the plant gets all the water from the mother plant. And whenever it's ready, I just open this, and this is a new strawberry plant. I try to show my back garden to all my neighbors. They're curious about like all the different plants. What I try to do is to research the most rare and like heritage varieties. So I have something that it's a bit different than usual, like black tomatoes, or it could be white cucumbers, or zucchini that like are green with the ending yellow, which are called zephyr zucchini. This passiflora that is on an arch above the garden, which I really love. But also I have dwarf varieties of trees, which are ideal to grow in a small space. I also have loads of different varieties of courgettes, because we eat a lot of courgettes, and beetroots, because I really love to plant rainbow beetroots, and each time it's a surprise of whatever you're gonna harvest, because it's a different color. One of my main inspiration, it was my granddad, and he taught me a lot of things about like the living soil and how to grow plants organically, but also how to forage and how to make your own compost. Use even my compost bin as a container for plants. Pumpkins are ideal. They can feed on whatever is underneath. And you can grow them like around your fence, just because they take up a lot of space, but it's gonna be a nice decoration. But also here, I've got a wormery that I found in the street. Another neighbor that he was about to chuck it away added some new fresh substrate, worms, and now I can recycle some of the scraps from the garden. I can go in here to feed the worms and have a new source of fertilizer. Most people think that this plant is completely dead, but in reality it's my intention to leave it here so I can dry the pods, and then I can pick them whenever I need to, and they're ready to either be stored or planted straight away into the garden. The whole ground needs to be a growing space. I use logs like this one or this one here to grow shiitake mushrooms. On the ground, I cover the concrete with wood chips, so I can inoculate every corner with wine cups, which also have like a symbiotic relationship with plants and help to grow them better. So this is my front yard, and it's just 5 by 2.5 meters. I've got roughly 5 or 6 raised beds, and it is actually my window to connect to the community. So I can not only showcase the plants that I'm growing, but I could also share some of the vegetables coming from my front yard. I've got a few different varieties of corn, courgettes, but also tomatoes, potatoes, and flowers, just to encourage pollinators. We preserve a lot of the food that we harvest from the garden. So I think tonight we're gonna have pickles that we made the other day from the garden, and then we can have some potatoes. Gardening, it's all about like harvesting fresh food, eating healthy, but also like it all ends up in the kitchen, but also it stimulates your creativity to cook it in different ways, reducing your waste and being sustainable.
Alessandro, I'm pleased that I'm not the only one growing vegetables in my front garden. Hopefully you can encourage the whole street to do exactly that. So well done, fella. This garden is both a historical record of one of the most influential gardeners, and it's a living, breathing, working space, which means there's always jobs to be done. Tom, interesting walking around the garden. Dahlias play a big part, don't they, here? But you're not afraid to throw something quite, I might even say, gaudy. You can shoot me down. But it's in your face.
When I was younger, I seemed to gravitate towards the quite blousy, showy ones. And as you mature, your tastes refine, don't they? And now I much prefer the single ones, particularly the species one.
Yeah.
This one's one of my favourites. It's Dahlia Murkii. And it's the origin of many of the
Yeah.
cultivated dahlias we grow today.
And it's stunning, isn't it? But, you know, the flower's beautiful, but the foliage is fantastic.
Yeah, the nice, neat foliage. This will flower all summer, deep into the autumn. It never lets you down. And it's not as floriferous as some of the hybridised ones, but I love these gentle nodding flowers. And it's fun to grow, because there's a lot of variation within the species. And so it's kind of fun to do a whole packet of seed and to see the diversity. And then out of maybe 30 plants, we might keep 3 or 4.
Right.
And picking the best ones, the best colour, the most flowering, the longest season, the neatest habit. And then from those best ones, then we'll propagate them vegetatively through tuber or cutting, so we're keeping the best forms.
So you're not just thinking about the here and now and how the borders look, it's about cross-pollination, what you might end up with.
Yeah, I want to select the most beautiful dahlia in the world one day. Yeah.
That's a fair statement, mate.
You've got to have ambition,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
But this is really exciting now because we raised this initially from seed, and so what I thought we could do is harvest some of these seeds.
Yeah.
We're trying to select these dry seeds and we'd spread the seeds out on newspaper, let them dry off, and then store them in an envelope. And what I must remember to do is label the envelope. Because we'll get to spring and this madman has stored seeds all over the potting shed and no one knows what they are.
I am that man.
Yeah, we all have that in us, don't we?
And with you, I mean, you're down south. I mean, I have to dig mine all out still at the moment. But what about you? Do the dahlias stay in or do they come out? How do you treat them?
Well, most are hardy down here in
Yeah.
Sussex, especially if you give them a good mulch and you're lucky with the weather. Particularly murky eye, this one
Yeah.
very hardy. But this one we will lift. 2 reasons. First of all, because we're a display garden here and we want to make the most of it in the spring.
Yeah.
And then we've got an opportunity to put some bulb display before we plant the dahlia. The other thing is there's nasty ground elder in here.
Yeah.
And as you know, it always comes back. When I lift the dahlia, I can dig it out. I'll plant some bulbs. Then when they come out, I can dig it out and it gives me the repeated attack. We're still having fun with the space.
And as far as sowing, you will sow those, what, in
Probably April.
April?
Yeah, probably April. Now, in the perfect world, they'll flower that year. The 2 limitations in gardening is space and time.
Yeah.
Ideally, I'd like to have another allotment patch where I could grow about 200 of these and then start selecting from that. Maybe one day I'll retire and I can just grow dahlias, yeah?
Yeah, and then you can actually select the most beautiful dahlia in the world. There you go. These are glorious gardens and have been a joy to visit. But sadly, we've nearly come to the end of our time here. He was a complete gardener. He could design, he was practical, he understood the site, he was creative, but also loved his plants and knew how to put them together.
What I love about William Robinson is that he was extremely influential. There were so many people that were influenced by him. You had people like Daisy Lloyd, a great Dixter.
Wow.
His book was her Bible.
Well, I think he has left an incredibly special place. But that's it from us. Next week, Rachel and Ari will be in Flintshire celebrating wildlife in our gardens at 8 p.m. In the meantime, look after yourselves and bye-bye.
Bye-bye.